Welcome back, everyone, to the Seniors Confessions channel. My brother-in-law pressured me to sleep with the director to get a promotion to department manager. It's family helping family, he said. My husband heard this and immediately growled. Why don't you go home and tell your own wife to sleep with him? My name is Knock Deep, and I am 33 years old. I am a document control team leader for a company that distributes household appliances. My job isn't glamorous. Every day revolves around contracts, quotes, supplier profiles, debt reconciliation tables, and figures that seem painfully dry. But I'm used to it. I've always been the type of person who wants everything to be clear, in black and white, exactly as it should be. Over many years of working, I am proudest not of how much money I've earned, but because I have never accepted a bribe to break my principles. My husband's name is Kwong. He is a machine maintenance technician for a private manufacturing workshop. Kwong isn't a rich man, nor is he the type to whisper sweet nothings, but he was kind, hardworking, and responsible when we first met. It was that genuine nature that made me believe I could entrust him with my whole life. I used to think that for women, marriage isn't about fancy houses, but about whether the man beside you knows how to love and live decently. But later on, I understood that a man who is too gentle and too passive, especially when standing between his wife and his own family, can sometimes cause his partner a lot of resentment. Kwong loves his mother and his younger brother, that is not wrong, but he loves them to the point where he always thinks, just let it go, he's still young, or, mom is old, don't upset her. That leniency unintentionally becomes an excuse for others to keep pushing their luck. My husband's family has 3 people. My father-in-law passed away when Kwong was in high school. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Le, is a woman who was widowed early. She always talks about loving her children and daughter-in-law, but deep down, she is very competitive. She often prides herself to the neighbors that, although her family isn't wealthy, her eldest son has a respectable wife who works for a company and knows how to manage and save. Each time I heard my mother-in-law praise me like that, I just smiled. At first, I felt hardened, thinking she valued me, but living together for a while, I realized those compliments weren't necessarily out of affection. It was more like her subtle way of reminding me that if I can earn money, I must take on burdens, look after her family, and endure to keep the peace. Below Kwong is his younger brother, Tuan. Tuan has worked as a sales associate at a company called Hung Fat for over 6 years. He's quick-witted and glib, always dressed flashily with the latest phone and polished shoes, yet after all these years, he's still just a regular employee. Every time work is mentioned, Tuan frowns and claims he's being suppressed, that his bosses don't recognize his talent, or that others steal his opportunities. Once, during dinner, Tuan slammed his bowl on the table and said, "In this day and age, just being good isn't enough. Sister Deep, if you want to climb the ladder, you need connections. If you keep being as upright as you are, you'll spend your whole life just filing paperwork for others to boss you around." Quote, I heard that and just replied gently, if one truly has the ability, it will eventually be recognized. As for anything that isn't truly yours, even if you snatch it, it's hard to keep. Quote, Tuan scoffed, his eyes full of contempt, you're too bookish. In the real world, nobody hands a position to the meek. Quote, Misla immediately defended her youngest son. She put a piece of meat into Tuan's bowl and said, Tuan is right about some things. In this day and age, who doesn't need to know how to network? He makes the effort to socialize and cares about his future. That's a good thing. As his sister-in-law, you should encourage him, not always lecture him. I remained silent. It wasn't because I lacked a counter-argument, but because I knew that in this house, whenever Tuan is involved, my mother-in-law always takes his side first. Right or wrong comes later. Kwong, sitting next to me, just sighed. He picked up some vegetables for me as if telling me to just let it go. I endured it once, then twice. Then it became a habit. During that time, Tuan started spending much more heavily than before. He bought expensive watches, replaced his motorbike, and kept upgrading his phone. When asked, he said he needed the image to meet clients and the style of someone about to be promoted to manager. One day during dinner, Tuan boasted that his company would soon be replacing the sales manager. It's definitely my turn this time, there's just one final step left. Mrs. La heard this and was visibly overjoyed. She turned to Kwong and said, look, if your brother becomes manager, our family will be so proud. Brothers helping each other out, everyone wins. I looked at Tuan's smug expression, and suddenly I felt a sense of unease. Truly capable people prepare for opportunities in silence, while the more Tuan boasted, the more I felt there was something unclean behind that manager position. A few times, I caught Kwang secretly transferring money to Tuan. When I asked him, he stammered that his brother needed some extra for client entertainment and would pay it back in a few days. I looked at my husband and said slowly, helping your brother isn't wrong, but if we keep covering for all his consequences, Tuan will never learn. He lowered his head, his voice weary. I know, but Mom keeps crying and saying this is his only chance. If I'm too harsh, it will just break Mom's heart. I didn't say anything more. I loved my husband, so I swallowed my frustrations many times. I thought Tuan was just the type who was vain, competitive, and not yet mature. I also thought Mrs. Le was just blinded by her excessive love for her youngest son. But back then, I never expected that Tuan's ambition to be manager would open such a filthy door, dragging me into a nightmare where the ones who pushed me first weren't outsiders, but the very people who called me family. After that dinner, I couldn't shake an unsettling feeling that I couldn't quite name. Tuan talked about his upcoming promotion, my mother-in-law was beaming, and Kwang was silent as always. His silence didn't make me angry immediately, but it left me feeling off balance. Because after years in this house, I understood that once Mrs. Le and Tuan were aligned, no matter how wrong they were, Kwang would always be the one in the middle, trying to keep the peace. From that day on, Tuan became even busier. He left early in the morning and returned late at night, always smelling strongly of alcohol and strange perfume. One night, it was nearly 1 a.m. when I got up for water and saw Tuan stumbling through the gate. His shirt was rumpled with a faint lipstick stain on the collar, and he held a paper bag from a luxury brand. Seeing me in the kitchen, Tuan paused for a beat and gave a forced smile. Not asleep yet, Deep? Work's been busy lately. I have to entertain clients. I looked at him and asked softly, does entertaining clients require such expensive gifts? Tuan shrugged, his tone a mix of arrogance and defiance. If you want people to remember you, you have to know how to invest. You're used to correcting files with a red pen, but in the business world, a single dinner is often worth more than 10 reports. I didn't answer. I didn't want to argue in the middle of the night, nor did I want to wake the whole house. But from that day on, I began to pay closer attention. Tuan was changing at an unbelievable pace. He bought a new watch, switched to an expensive phone, and constantly took calls while whispering in the backyard. Once, I accidentally overheard Tuan laughing in a sycophantic way. Yes, don't worry, I've already booked the room. Whatever you guys need, I'll have it ready. Just put in a good word for me with Boss Kai, that's all. The name Kai just grazed my ears, but for some reason, it made my heart stop. In everyone's life, there are names that, even after years of silence, only need a fleeting mention to drag up a piece of the distant past. For me, Kai was exactly one of those names. I had tried to forget that person a long time ago. Back in my college years, when I was just a provincial student clutching textbooks across the campus, hoping only for a decent job to ease my parents' burdens. Back then, Kai was a year ahead of me. He was famous on campus for being wealthy, dressing stylishly, speaking charmingly, and always being surrounded by a group of friends. At first, Kai seemed polite, waiting for me outside the library, buying me water, and sending notes, saying he liked my serious nature, but later, that attention turned into obsession. He messaged me constantly and blocked my path at the dorm gate, even telling friends once that I would be his girlfriend sooner or later. I had rejected him so many times, but Kai refused to understand. Only when I heard he was entangled with 2 other girls at once, and even bragged about his romances like trophies, did I truly feel disgusted. The last time, he stood in the middle of the school courtyard with a bouquet, deliberately making a scene in front of everyone. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Don't use such a spectacle to force others to accept your feelings. I don't like you, and I don't want anything to do with you ever again." After that, Kai stared at me for a long time. His look then wasn't that of someone disappointed by rejection, but of someone whose pride had been wounded. He just gave a cold laugh and said, "Deep, someone like you will eventually have a day where you need someone like me." I thought it was just a bitter remark from a young man. After graduation, I got a job, got married, and lived my own life. I never expected that years later, that name would reappear in my brother-in-law's promotion story. One Sunday evening, Tuan unexpectedly invited the whole family out to a restaurant. He said he had good news. Ms. Le wore her best silk outfit, and Kwang thought his brother was finally being recognized by the company, so he was happy for him. During the meal, Tuan raised his beer glass, smiling very proudly. If nothing changes, I'll be promoted to head of sales next month. Everything is almost set, just waiting for Director Kai's final nod. My hand, as I was picking up some vegetables, suddenly froze. Tuan turned to look at me. What's wrong? I tried to stay calm and asked Tuan, what is Director Kai's full name? Tuan was a bit surprised but then smiled. Nguyen Ton Kai, why? Do you know him? Hearing those 3 words, a chill ran down my spine. It really was him, the man I had stayed away from years ago, now holding the position Tuan was longing for. I put my chopsticks down and said slowly, if it's him, you should be careful. He is not the type of person who is decent. Tuan's face darkened immediately. You're judging him just from hearing his name? He's a director now, with connections, money, and power. Don't use the past to judge a successful man. Mrs. La chimed in as well. Deep, every young man makes mistakes. What matters is that he can help your brother now. I looked at my mother-in-law, then at Tuan. Both of them only saw the department head position ahead. Neither wanted to hear a sincere warning. Tuan was silent then, but I saw his hand under the table clench slightly. Perhaps he was starting to realize this wasn't as simple as a normal promotion. That meal ended in an awkward atmosphere. On the way back, Tuan kept rambling on about how his boss, Kai, was reasonable and thoughtful. I sat in the back of the car, watching the streetlights pass by the window with a heavy heart. I don't know if Kai even remembers me. I also don't know if he intentionally drew Tuan close or if it's just a cruel coincidence. But a woman's intuition, having once been stalked by him, tells me that once that door to the past is opened, it won't just stop at a few old stories. That night when I got home, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Tuan, lying beside me, was also unusually silent. He didn't ask more about Kai, perhaps afraid that bringing up the past would upset me, but I knew a question had begun to form in his mind. A man who once stalked his wife in college is now the one deciding his brother's position. No matter how you look at it, that cannot be considered normal. A few days later, Tuan seemed even more excited. He walked around the house like someone who had victory firmly in his grasp. One day, as soon as he entered, Tuan kicked his shoes aside, whistling, and placed an expensive gift bag on the table. Mrs. Le ran out from the kitchen, her eyes lighting up. Is that a bribe for the boss, son? Tuan smiled smugly. Don't worry, Mom, I've already taken care of almost everything. The department head seat won't escape me this time. I was washing dishes in the kitchen and froze when I heard that. The words already taken care of were enough to make me feel uncomfortable. A position in a company, if deserved, should be earned through competence, results, and credibility. But if it has to be taken care of with bribes, drinking, and after-hours parties, then that seat was never clean to begin with. I meant to speak up but decided against it. At this point, anything I said would be interpreted by Tuan as jealousy or sabotage. During dinner that night, Tuan downed 2 cans of beer, even though he rarely drinks at home. His face turned red, and his voice grew louder. He talked about entertaining guests at restaurants, about taking Director Kai out to meet partners, and about gifts just subtle enough to make his superior remember him. Mrs. Le sat listening, occasionally nodding as if her son were recounting a glorious feat. Tuan put his chopsticks down and asked bluntly, where do you get the money to spend so much? Tuan hesitated for a moment but quickly brushed it off with a laugh. Don't worry, I've got it all figured out. You have to spend big to invest in your career. If you pinch every penny like you'll just be a worker your whole life. That remark made the atmosphere at the dinner table drop instantly. I looked at Tuan and saw his jaw tighten, but he held his tongue. Mrs. Le hurriedly stepped in. Come on, you're brothers, why be so tense? Tuan has ambition, we should be happy for him. Later on, when he becomes a manager, our family will benefit too. Hearing the words, benefit too, my heart sank. For some reason, I felt that Mrs. Le didn't just want Tuan to get promoted out of pride, but also viewed it as a collective family investment. One that Tuan and I would soon be dragged into. Right at that moment, Tuan's phone rang, lighting up on the table. I only caught the name, Mr. Kai, appearing before Tuan hurriedly grabbed the phone. His expression changed rapidly. The excitement from moments ago vanished, replaced by an unmistakable tension. Tuan stood up and walked out to the patio, but the glass dining door wasn't fully closed, so a few sentences reached my ears. Yes, I understand. I have already done everything you asked. Please don't change your mind at the last minute like this. No, that's not what I meant. I'll find a way. Tuan's voice got quieter and quieter, but I could still hear the subservience in it. That was not the voice of someone talking to a normal superior. It was the voice of someone afraid of losing their last lifeline. I looked over at Kwong. He had heard it too, but he said nothing in front of his mother. Tuan walked back in, his face dark. He sat down but didn't eat, just crushed his beer can until it was deformed. Ms. Le asked anxiously, "What's wrong, son?" Tuan snapped, "Nothing, just work stuff." Then he jumped up and went to his room. The sound of the door slamming shut upstairs made the whole house shake slightly. 2 days later, Tuan was unexpectedly waiting for me in the living room when I got home from work. He sat on the sofa, an unlit cigarette in his hand, his expression a mix of restlessness and calculation. Seeing me walk in, Tuan looked up and asked immediately, "Deep, were you and Kai close back in the day?" I took off my bag and replied coldly, "Not close, we just went to the same school." Tuan stared at me, but he said he missed you a lot. I froze, a chill running down my spine. I turned to look at Tuan. "You met him and mentioned me?" Tuan averted his eyes slightly but remained stubborn. "We were just making small talk." He asked how many people were in my family. I told him my brother married a woman named Deep, and who knew he actually knew you. Hearing that, I felt even more uneasy inside. Kai is not the type to ask questions aimlessly. If he mentioned me, it's certainly not just about old memories. From that day on, Tuan started prying more. Sometimes asking what happened between Kai and me in college, sometimes why I hated him, or making vague hints. Actually, with a successful man like him, a smart woman should know how to leverage the connection. I looked Tuan straight in the eye and said clearly, "Tuan, I'll tell you this once. Don't drag me into your business with Kai. I don't want to be involved with that person." Tuan laughed coldly. "Why are you so tense? He's a director now, not the student he was back then. Besides, family should help each other when they can. When I get ahead later, the whole family benefits. Who loses out?" That statement made me feel choked up. It wasn't overtly dirty yet, but it reeked of dishonorable scheming. I looked at Tuan and suddenly found my brother-in-law terrifyingly like a stranger. People can be ambitious and want a better life, but once they start treating kin as pawns to climb higher, that ambition has turned rotten. Around the same time, Mrs. Le also changed her tone. She didn't say it directly but kept hinting at it during meals. "Our family is small. Whatever happens, we must know how to support each other. If one person rises, the whole family rises. No one should just try to keep their own hands clean." Once, she even looked at me and said, "A smart woman knows when to be soft. If you're too rigid, the whole family might break." I set my bowl down, my heart beginning to churn. I didn't know what Tuan and Mrs. Le were about to say, but every word and look from them made me realize something very bad was approaching. And what terrified me most wasn't Kai, but the feeling that my own in-laws were quietly paving the way for him to enter my life once again. The next morning, I went to work with a heart as heavy as a stone. All night, Mrs. Lee's insinuations and Tuan's probing eyes kept swirling in my mind. I tried to reassure myself that I was perhaps overthinking, that no matter how ambitious Tuan was, he couldn't use his sister-in-law as a bargaining chip for a manager's seat. But life is sometimes cruel in that way. What you think is impossible is exactly what someone else has already planned in their heart. Around 4 p.m., while I was finishing a supplier file, my phone buzzed. It was Tuan. He rarely called me directly. If there was something, he would text Kwong or ask my mother-in-law to relay it. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Tuan's voice on the other end sounded completely different, softer, lower. Like someone trying hard to act kind. "Deep, are you free this afternoon? I want to meet and talk to you privately for a bit." I asked immediately. "Whatever it is, let's talk about it at home tonight." Tuan was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "It's not convenient to talk at home. This involves my work, and it also involves Kai. Please come to the coffee shop near your office. I'm already here." Hearing Kai's name, my hand tightened slightly. I didn't want to meet, but if I kept avoiding it, I would never know what they were plotting. After a few seconds of thought, I agreed. The coffee shop was on a small street, and it was quite crowded at rush hour. I chose to sit at a table near the glass window, where I could see clearly outside. Tuan was already sitting there, a nearly untouched cup of coffee in front of him. Looking at him that day, I realized his usual polished look was half gone. His eyes were dark, his lips dry, and his hands kept spinning a silver lighter. It was the appearance of someone under so much pressure they could no longer maintain a facade of confidence. I sat down and got straight to the point, saying, "Whatever you want to say it quickly. I don't like beating around the bush." Tuan looked up at me, trying to smile, but the smile was pitifully distorted. "Deep, this time is the biggest opportunity of my life. I've been at Hung Fat for 6 years, being looked down on enough. Once I become a manager, everything will change. Salary up, bonus up, and connections will be different too. Later, I can help Kwong, help Mom, and make the whole family proud." I calmly replied, "If you truly deserve it, I'm happy for you, but if you have to use dirty tricks to get there, that seat won't be comfortable." Tuan lowered his head, his voice becoming more urgent. "It's easy for you to say, you have a stable job and everyone respects you. What about me? I've been stuck in one place for 6 years, watching people less capable than me climb up just because they know how to play the game. I don't want to be ordered around for the rest of my life." At that point, Tuan pulled some receipts and printed bank transfer screenshots from his pocket and pushed them toward me. I glanced at them and immediately saw that the figures were not small. Restaurants, karaoke, gifts, vacations, entertainment expenses, and networking costs. The total has reached several hundred million. I asked coldly, "Where did this money come from?" Tuan avoided my eyes. "I managed to get it. Don't ask about that. The problem is I've already put in too much. I can't stop now." I looked at him, each word clearly enunciated. "You walked into this yourself. Find your own way out. Don't drag others down with you." Tuan bit his lip, his expression ugly. He was silent for a long time before speaking, his voice so soft it nearly blended into the coffee machine's hum. "But now, there is only one way out." "What way?" I asked. Tuan looked up at me, his gaze sending a chill down my spine, for it held not just pleading but a calculated preparation. He spoke slowly. "Mr. Kai, he still remembers you. He said if you agree to meet him privately for one night, he will sign the promotion order for me." In that moment, every sound around me seemed to fade away completely. I could hear my heart beating, hear my own breath choking in my chest. I looked at Tuan, looked very closely, hoping I had misheard, but his bowed head and cowardly silence answered everything. I asked again, my voice trembling with anger, "What did you just say?" Tuan hurried to explain, as if simply softening the words would make that filthy act less dirty. "Don't take it so seriously. Mr. Kai isn't a total stranger. He used to like you back in the day, anyway. Just this once, family helping each other out a little. Once I'm promoted later, I won't forget your favor." I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. A brother-in-law, who still called me sister-in-law at family dinners, now sat before me, calmly asking me to trade my dignity for his promotion. I asked, "Tuan, you have a wife, don't you?" He started in surprise. "Why are you bringing Hong into this?" I looked straight into his eyes. "If someone told Hong to sleep with someone else so you could get promoted, would you agree?" Tuan instantly turned red. "What nonsense are you talking about? Hong is my wife." I laughed, but the laughter choked bitterly in my throat. "And I am Kwan's wife. I am a human being too, not a ladder for you to climb up on." Tuan panicked and lowered his voice to plead. "Deep, think about Mom, think about Kwong. If I get this position, I can bring the whole family up later. You sacrifice a little, and in return, the whole family benefits. What's there to lose?" Hearing the word sacrifice, I could no longer keep my cool. In front of me was a glass of water. I grabbed it and threw it straight into Tuan's face. Water dripped down his hair and onto his expensive shirt collar. Tuan was stunned. A few people in the cafe turned to look. I stood up, my voice so cold that even I found it strange. "Listen clearly to me. I may be poor, I may be ordinary, but I am not cheap. Don't ever bring this up with me again." After saying that, I grabbed my bag and walked out. Behind me, Tuan called out, "Deep, don't be so tense. If you don't help me, I'm really dead." Quote. I didn't turn back. The street wind hit my face. It was freezing, but my heart was even colder. Because I knew this wouldn't end with just a suggestion in a cafe. For someone who dared to say that, he surely hadn't just prepared one way to force me. I left the cafe with my legs feeling numb. Outside, vehicles were still crowding, horns were honking, people were still rushing through their lives. Only I, after Tuan's words, felt as if the world around me had just been stained. I didn't cry. There are humiliations so deep that tears cannot even fall, only a wave of nausea stuck in my throat. Getting home, I saw Misla sitting in the living room, a hot cup of tea on the table and her phone placed face down beside it. Seeing me walk in, she looked up quickly and then looked down, as if she already knew I had just met Tuan. I said nothing, just gave a greeting and went straight upstairs. I needed to calm down before Kwang returned, because I didn't want to tell him everything in a fit of uncontrollable rage. But I had just changed out of my work clothes when the door downstairs opened. Tuan is home. His heavy footsteps entered the living room, followed by Mrs. Lee's voice, lowered but still audible enough for me to catch through the door crack. What did she say? Tuan replied with an irritated tone. She acts like she's so high and mighty. I only said a few words and she threw water in my face in front of everyone. Quote, Mrs. Le sighed, I told you to choose your words carefully. Deep is stubborn, you have to be gentle. Quote. I stood frozen behind the bedroom door. So, she already knew. Not only did she know, but she was also planning with Tuan how to persuade me. My heart grew cold, piece by piece. Before this, I had still tried to keep a shred of respect for Mrs. Le as my mother-in-law. Even though she was biased, even though she often said things that hurt me, at that moment I realized the final line had begun to be crossed. A moment later, Mrs. Le called out, Deep, come down, I want to talk to you. Her voice wasn't harsh. It was even gentler than usual. It was that very gentleness that made me feel afraid. I took a deep breath and walked downstairs. Tuan was no longer in the living room. He must have been avoiding me so she could speak first. Mrs. Le pointed to the chair opposite her. Sit down. I sat down, back straight, hands resting on my knees. Mrs. Le poured me a cup of tea, pushed it in front of me, and sighed. I heard Tuan's side of the story. He spoke foolishly and didn't handle it well, making you angry. I looked at her and asked directly, Do you know what Tuan actually said to me? She avoided my gaze for a brief moment then replied, I know, but you must also understand that he is at a dead end. I thought I had misheard. I looked at her intently, hoping she would continue by saying Tuan was wrong, that she had called me down to apologize on his behalf. But no, Mrs. Le took a sip of tea, her voice remaining steady. This opportunity doesn't come easily, child. If Tuan gets promoted to manager, his life will change. I'm old now, I just want to see my children doing better. If one person succeeds, the whole family benefits. Quote, I asked, each word feeling as if it were stuck in my throat. So, what do you want me to do? Mrs. Le set her teacup down and clasped her hands together. She was silent for a few seconds, then said very softly, I'm not forcing you, but if you could just be a little softer with Mr. Kai, meet him once, consider it for the sake of our family. I jumped up immediately. Mother, that shout rang out so sharply that even I was startled. Mrs. Le frowned slightly, as if I were the disrespectful one. I was trembling with anger. Do you even hear what you are saying? I am Kwang's wife, your daughter-in-law. Are you asking me to go meet another man in private to trade for Tuan's promotion? Mrs. Le stood up as well, her voice beginning to rise. Don't speak so harshly. I only said to meet him once, not to leave your husband or home. In this day and age, you have to know how to be flexible. A smart woman is one who knows how to prioritize the bigger picture. I looked at her, my throat tight with bitterness. Is your bigger picture my honor? Mrs. Le pursed her lips. Perhaps she knew she was wrong, but her love for her youngest son and her ambition to save face had won out. The rest of the salary. She continued, her voice lowering, but each word sounding colder. You work in records control, the pay is decent, but will it ever equal the department head position Tuan could have? Once he gets promoted, he can pull his brother up, take care of me, take care of the whole family. What would you lose by sacrificing a little? I felt my vision go dark. Sacrificing a little, I repeated, almost unable to believe it. You call that a little? Mrs. Le looked at me, her gaze both pleading and reproachful. For a woman, keeping the family together is what's most important. Men just want a bit of fun sometimes, then it's over. Just turn a blind eye and let it pass. Don't let your own pride ruin your brother-in-law's future. Right at that moment, the sound of a key turning in the lock came from the door. Kwang was home. The door opened, and he stood there, his work clothes still dusty, his hand still holding his empty lunchbox. He had likely heard the end of the conversation. His face was deathly pale, and his eyes were full of horror as he looked at his mother. Mrs. Le was startled, her mouth moving soundlessly. "Kwong, you're home? Your mother and I were just talking." Kwong slammed the lunchbox down on the table. That harsh sound made the entire living room fall silent. He stepped forward, not looking at me first, but staring straight at Tuan, who had been lurking by the kitchen door. His voice was hoarse, but every word felt as heavy as stone. "You're something else, wanting to get ahead that way, right?" Tuan turned pale. "Brother, listen to me first, it's not what you think." Kwong took another step forward, his eyes turning red. "If it's not what I think, then what is it? You told my wife to sleep with your director so you could become a manager, and mother is sitting here, urging my wife to just close her eyes and let it happen. What do both of you take deep for?" Mrs. Le burst into tears. "I am only doing this for the sake of this family, my son. Tuan is your brother, don't you care about him?" Kwong turned to his mother, his voice choked with pain. "Caring for my brother doesn't mean trading my wife as an object." Then he looked straight at Tuan, his whole body trembling with rage, but his voice was chillingly clear. If you want to please the director, go do it yourself. Go home and tell your own wife to sleep with him. Don't you ever dare mention my wife's name ever again." The room fell deathly silent. Tuan stood frozen, as if he had just been slapped across the face. Mrs. Le clutched her chest, tears streaming down, but she couldn't utter a word. I stood behind Kwong, my hands ice cold, feeling both hurt and relieved. Hurt because I had finally heard the cruelest words from my own in-laws. Relieved because, at least, in the moment I thought the whole house had pushed me over the edge, my husband stood as a shield in front of me. After Kwong's words, the room felt as if all the air had been sucked out. Tuan stood rooted to the kitchen doorway, his face shifting from red to white. Mrs. Le clutched her chest and collapsed into a chair, tears flowing, but no sound could escape her. And me, I stood behind my husband, my hands still freezing, but inside, something had both shattered and been salvaged. What shattered was my final trust in these so-called family members, and what was salvaged was a shred of self-respect. Because at least in that moment, Kwong didn't leave me alone. It took Tuan a few seconds to regain his senses. He wiped his face hurriedly and let out a dry laugh. The laugh sounded both humiliated and bitter. "You certainly talk a good game. I am thinking about the family's future, while you only know how to defend your wife. Do you know how much our family could benefit if I became a department manager?" Kwong looked at his younger brother, his gaze so cold that even I felt strange. "Your future must not be built on my wife's body. Remember that well." Mrs. Le heard this and immediately burst into tears. She slapped her thigh, her voice choking. "Oh Kwong, I raised you to this age, and now I just want my sons to support each other. I'm not asking Deep to do anything shameful, just to be a little flexible, meet him once to get it over with. How can you bear to speak so harshly to me?" I looked at her, feeling a sense of pain and coldness in my heart. Even now, she still refuses to call the situation by its proper name. My honor is just something she sugarcoats to make it easier to swallow. Kwong turned to his mother, his voice lowered but still very clear. "Mother, don't use your maternal efforts to force me to stay silent about what is wrong. I can show you filial piety, but I cannot let my wife be traded for a position for Tuan." Mrs. Le was stunned. Perhaps this was the first time Kwong had spoken so decisively to her. Up until now, he had always been the son who knew how to endure, listen, and smooth things over. But that evening, he was no longer smoothing things over. Tuan gritted his teeth and pointed at me. "It's all your fault. If you hadn't made such a big deal out of it, things wouldn't have reached this point. Kai just wanted to see you because he still has old feelings for you. You're acting as if they're forcing you to die." I stepped forward, looking him straight in the eye. "Tuan, if you have a shred of decency left, don't call that feelings. A decent man would not use his own position to bargain with his sister-in-law." Tuan froze for a moment, but immediately turned his face away as if he didn't want to hear it. Kwong pointed at the door, his voice strained. "From today on, you cover every expense you've incurred yourself. I won't pay for you anymore. I also forbid you from using my name or my wife's name when talking to anyone. And if you dare let that guy Kai message Deep one more time, I will go straight to your company to clear everything up." Tuan immediately turned pale, but that fear didn't last long, quickly hardening into resentment. He gave a cold laugh. "Do you think you can stand against it? Do you think that just by being a good person, people will leave you alone?" After saying that, Tuan headed to his room and slammed the door shut. Mrs. Le was still sitting in the living room crying, muttering that this family was cursed, and siblings didn't know how to love one another. Kwong didn't respond anymore. He took my hand and pulled me to our room. As soon as the door closed, he slumped onto the edge of the bed, covering his face with his hands. I saw his shoulders trembling ever so slightly. The man who had just stood up to protect me out there was actually heartbroken inside, caught between his mother, his brother, and his wife. No one can remain calm when they have to tear apart the peaceful facade of their own family with their own hands. I sat down beside him. Kwang took my hand, his voice raspy as he apologized, saying he should have seen it sooner. He kept thinking that if he just endured a little, the house would stay peaceful. I shook my head and said softly, enduring for the right reasons is tolerance, but enduring what is wrong only empowers the wrongdoer. He didn't say anything more, just squeezed my hand tightly for a long time. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. A message arrived from an unknown number. I opened it, and just reading the first few words sent a chill down my spine. Deep, you are still as beautiful and stubborn as you were back then. I handed the phone to Kwang, and his face immediately darkened. A second message arrived right after. Tuan was only speaking for me, don't blame him. The third message, I don't like to force people, but I also don't like being rejected a second time. Kwang jumped up, intending to call back immediately. I held his hand. Don't, he wants you to lose your composure. He gasped for air, his eyes reddening with anger. He's texting your phone like that and you expect me to just sit still? I looked at him, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was trembling myself. It's not about sitting still, it's about staying level-headed. People like Kai don't text to talk, he texts to provoke. That night, we barely slept. The next morning, as I stepped into the kitchen, Mrs. Le looked at me with cold eyes, as if I were the one at fault. Tuan didn't eat breakfast, but before leaving the house, he threw out a remark. You'll see that playing the saint isn't easy. I didn't respond, but by noon, a colleague sent me a screenshot from Tuan's personal page. He had posted a vague status about someone who acts moral on the outside but destroys their brother-in-law's livelihood behind their back. If family treats you like that, how can you blame strangers? Under the post, several relatives started commenting and asking questions. Some criticized me for being selfish without knowing the full story, while others said a wife should always prioritize her husband's family. I stared at the screen, a bitter taste rising in my throat. So, after failing to pressure me with tears and family ties, Tuan started using public opinion to paint me as the villain. I turned off my phone and looked out the office window. It was still sunny outside, but deep down, I knew the real storm had only just begun. Kai had walked out of the past, and Tuan was no longer hiding his cowardice. As for Mrs. Le, through her silence, she had chosen to side with a son willing to use his sister-in-law as a bargaining chip. From that moment on, I knew I couldn't just endure it to keep the peace anymore. 2 days after Tuan's passive-aggressive post, I still tried to maintain a normal routine. Morning work, evening home, cooking, cleaning, and talking to Kwang as if no new cracks had appeared in that house. But in reality, my heart had changed. I no longer looked at everything with resignation. I began to save every message, every post, and every one of Tuan's veiled remarks. Not to retaliate immediately, but to protect myself if things were to escalate further. That afternoon, as I finished work and stood in front of the office waiting for Kwang to pick me up, a woman's voice whispered softly behind me. Deep, I turned around to see Hong, Tuan's wife. She was wearing an old cream-colored shirt, her hair tied low, and her face was so pale she looked like she had just recovered from an illness. What caught my attention most was that she kept pulling her sleeves down low, as if trying to hide something. I was quite surprised. Since everything happened, Hong had barely appeared at her husband's family home. In the past, at family dinners, she was quiet, just sitting silently next to Tuan. She only answered when spoken to. I used to think Hong was too shy and too introverted. But today, seeing her restless demeanor, I realized that perhaps her silence wasn't due to her personality, but fear. I asked softly, Hong, did you need to see me about something? She looked around, her eyes panicked as if afraid someone was watching. Could we speak in private for a moment? But please, don't tell Tuan I met with you, I beg you. Hong's voice trembled so much that I couldn't refuse. I took her to a small cafe a few doors down from the company. I chose a corner table away from the crowd and ordered her a warm drink. As soon as she sat down, Hong burst into tears. She cried very softly, not daring to sob aloud, dabbing her eyes with a tissue as if she were afraid her own pain might bother others. I waited for her to calm down and said, Go ahead, speak. I listened as Hong lowered her head, her hands tightly intertwined. A long while later, she choked out, Deep, I'm sorry, I know about what Tuan told you. I know he's wrong, but I don't dare stop him anymore. I looked at her in silence. Hong gently pulled up her sleeve. On her wrist was a faint bruise, not large, but enough for anyone to see it wasn't from a normal bump. She quickly pulled her sleeve down, her voice faltering. He doesn't hit me often, but he knows how to make me afraid. Sometimes it's just breaking a glass, locking the door, or saying if I open my mouth to anyone, he'll divorce me, take the kids, and leave me with nothing. I felt a weight in my chest. A woman suffering from emotional abuse rarely finds it easy to cry for help, because their wounds don't always show on their skin. It lies in a hesitant voice, in eyes that are always looking over their shoulder, in the habit of blaming themselves even when they are the ones being hurt. Hong took a stack of folded papers from her bag and placed them on the table. Look at these. Tuan isn't just spending money on clients like everyone thinks. He has borrowed a lot from outside lenders. I opened it up, and every line and every number struck my eyes. Loans from apps, friends, acquaintances, car pawns, and even our joint savings account withdrawn. It all adds up to over 800 million. I looked at Hong and asked softly, "Why didn't you tell Kwong sooner?" Hong gave a bitter, twisted smile. Even if I spoke up, who would believe me? My mother-in-law always tells me I must protect my husband's reputation. Tuan calls me a parasite and says I shouldn't interfere in big business. Once, I hid the loan papers, but he found out. He told me that if I ruined this opportunity, he would make sure I never saw our child again. At the mention of her child, Hong truly broke down in tears. I reached out to take her hand. It was freezing cold. I asked, "Why would Tuan dare to borrow so much? Is it just for the department head position?" Hong shook her head and pulled out her phone to open a photo, a blurry screenshot of a computer screen, but the project estimate table was still clear. The supplier names were partially hidden, and next to them were numbers that had been unusually inflated. Hong lowered her voice. "It's not just a promotion. Tuan knows the company has a big project coming up. If he becomes the sales manager, he'll have the authority to propose suppliers. Quote, he said that if he could just sign these contracts, the price difference would be enough to pay off all his debts and even buy a house." A chill went down my spine as everything suddenly fell into place. The gifts, the drinking, Kai, the department head chair, and that filthy proposal he made to me. It wasn't just ambition for a title, it was a financial trap. Tuan poured everything he had into buying a position he believed he could use to siphon money from the company. And Kai, the one with the power to sign off on it, turned me into the final hurdle to satisfy his sick ego from the past. I asked Hong, "Where did you get these photos?" She replied very quietly, "One night when Tuan was drunk, he fell asleep without turning off his phone. I saw the table and was so scared that I took a picture of it. I don't understand it all, but I know it's wrong. You work with the records, so you surely understand it better than I do." I looked at the girl in front of me, feeling both sympathy and pain. Hong isn't sharp or strong like the women people usually praise, but in her fear, she still tries to hold on to a sense of right and wrong. Before leaving the cafe, Hong held my hand very tightly. "Deep, I'm not asking you to forgive Tuan. I just ask that you don't let him drag anyone else down. I'm so scared. I'm afraid that one day when my child grows up, they will see their father doing bad things while their mother just stands by in silence." Those words choked me up. I didn't make any grand promises, just told her to get home safely. From now on, if Tuan forces you to sign or say anything, don't face it alone. Call me or call Kwong. Hong nodded, tears falling again. I stood watching her fade into the end of the street, still holding the loan papers and screenshots in my hand. At that moment, I understood that I was no longer just protecting my own honor. I was standing before a bigger, dirtier conspiracy. And if I continued to stay silent, not just me, but Hong, Kwong, and even that innocent child would be dragged into the vortex created by Tuan's greed and Kai's baseness. After meeting with Hong, I didn't go home right away. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the pile of loan papers and screenshots, my heart feeling as heavy as if pressed by a stone. At first, I thought the story was just about Tuan wanting a promotion and Kai using the past to force me to bow down, but now everything has gone far beyond a dirty proposition. Behind that department head position are loans, inflated projects, and a plan to bleed the company dry that has been prepared in advance. I understood that if I only reacted with anger, I would lose. With people like Kai and Tuan, if you want to confront them, you must have evidence. That evening, I didn't tell Misla everything, and I didn't say anything in front of Tuan. I just pulled Kwong into the room and placed all the papers Hong gave me on the table. Kwong looked through each page, his expression growing increasingly grim. When he reached the photo of the budget estimate, he looked up at me. He's lost his mind. He's not just buying a promotion, he intends to actually steal company money. I nodded, and Kai is using your situation to keep Tuan under his control. If I'm not careful, they will turn me into the villain before the truth comes to light. I started saving everything. Kai's anonymous messages, Tuan's cryptic posts, Hong's loan agreement, photos of the estimates. Even the time and place I met Hong. Working in document control, I know that in matters like this, emotions aren't enough. To protect myself, every small detail must have clear dates, times, evidence, and links. But I didn't expect Kai to strike so quickly. The next morning, I had barely arrived at the company when I felt a strange atmosphere. A few colleagues looked at me then immediately turned away. The assistant who usually brings me coffee only greeted me very softly. Then she hurried back to her desk. I set my bag down and opened my computer. I tried to tell myself not to overthink, but when I pulled the right desk drawer to get the supplier file, I froze. Inside the drawer was a very thick brown envelope. I had never seen it before. I used the tip of a pen to pull the envelope out and crack it open. Inside were neatly bundled stacks of cash, accompanied by a small note. Ms. Deep, help approve the supplier's file. My heart pounded. 100 million. I didn't need to count to guess that the amount was prepared specifically to make me look like a bribe taker. I stood up immediately, called my assistant over as a witness, and demanded no one touch the envelope. But less than 10 minutes later, the HR manager and 2 security guards approached. Her face was stern, bordering on cold. Ms. Deep, we have received a report that you accepted money to influence supplier files. Please cooperate with the investigation. I looked at her and asked slowly, what time was the report filed? Who is the whistleblower? And why did everyone arrive just as the envelope appeared in my drawer? She hesitated for a moment, but quickly regained her firm demeanor. Those matters will be verified by the investigation board. For now, the money is in your drawer. I replied. I request that the scene be sealed, a full report filed, surveillance footage extracted, and the fingerprints on the envelope checked. I do not accept anyone drawing conclusions before there is evidence. A few people around started whispering. I heard someone murmur, I didn't expect Deep to be involved in this. That sentence stung my heart. It takes years to build a bit of reputation, but with just one dirty envelope misplaced, people are ready to doubt me. Just as Kai wanted, he doesn't need me to be truly dirty, just to plant the thought in others' minds that I could be. I asked to check the cameras, but the technician reported that during the exact window from 7:40 to 8:10, the camera in my area had a signal error, a ridiculously convenient coincidence. I looked at the HR manager and asked, the camera broke exactly when the envelope appeared. Do you find this normal? She avoided my gaze, her voice dropping. Deep, you've worked here a long time. If this is handled quietly, the company will still save face for you. Just admit that someone asked you to hold it. Quote, since you haven't reported it yet, things will be much easier. I looked straight at her. Are you advising me to take the blame for something I didn't do? She remained silent. That silence told me more than any explanation could. Perhaps she is under pressure, or someone is pulling the strings, but clearly, this trap was set in a rush and quite crudely. It's just a pity it hit the thing I guard most. My professional integrity. In the afternoon, as I just left the temporary meeting room, my phone vibrated again. It was still an unknown number. I answered but stayed silent. On the other end came Kai's low laughter. Deep, I told you, be good and you'll stay clean. Act too tough and I'll make you dirty. I gripped my phone tightly and stepped into a quiet corner of the hallway. The envelope in the drawer was your doing. Kai chuckled, you're smart, but sometimes being too smart is a burden. I just want you to understand that your reputation is in my hands more easily than you think. I tried to keep my voice calm. You think putting dirty money in a drawer makes me a dirty person? He replied very slowly, each word dripping like poison into my ears. You don't need to actually be dirty, you just need people to believe you are. I felt my palms becoming slick with sweat. Kai continued, meet me alone tonight. If you come, the complaint disappears, the footage can be recovered, and people will say it was just a misunderstanding. Otherwise, tomorrow the whole company will know that Ms. Deep Tan Sao actually knows how to take money too. I closed my eyes for a second, swallowing my anger. Kai, you're still as cowardly as ever. only now you have a position to hide that cowardice behind." There was a few seconds of silence on the other end. When Kai spoke again, his voice was colder, choosing his words carefully. "Deep, you embarrassed me in front of the whole school back then. This time, I'll let you know what it feels like to be looked at with contempt." The call cut off abruptly. I stood alone in the hallway, my back cold with sweat, but this time I was no longer shaking like before. Kai had taken it a step further. He hadn't just harassed me or forced Tuan Lam to be a bridge, he had now directly moved to destroy my reputation. I stared at the phone screen where the call had just ended and quietly saved the timestamp. If he wants to make me look dirty in everyone's eyes, then I must be so clean that every bit of mud he throws clearly reveals his own fingerprints. That evening, Kwang came to pick me up at the company. He didn't ask much in front of the security guards and colleagues, just looked at my expression and quietly took my bag. On the way home, I told him about the envelope in the drawer, about the cameras suddenly breaking at that exact moment, and Kai's call in the hallway. Kwang gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning pale. But this time he didn't flare up like before. He just said very softly, "This is starting to attack your honor." I looked out the window, my heart growing cold. That's right, for someone working in document control like me, being suspected of bribery is like having someone smear ink all over my entire career. I can endure others misunderstanding me regarding family matters, but not when it comes to my profession. Once a reputation is ruined, even if you are cleared later, that stain can linger for a very long time in people's eyes. As soon as I stepped into the house, I saw Mrs. Lee sitting in the living room. Strangely, she wasn't watching TV today, nor was she counting her prayer beads like the past few days. She sat upright with a cold expression, while Tuan sat beside her with his legs crossed on the sofa, looking both weary and triumphant. The moment she saw me, Mrs. Lee asked immediately, "What happened at your company that people are calling home to inquire about it?" I froze. The incident at the company hadn't even happened a full day ago, yet Mrs. Lee already knew. I looked at her and asked slowly, "Who called you, Mom?" She looked slightly flustered but still tried to keep her voice firm. "I just heard it from people. There's no smoke without fire. What did you do to make people suspect you of taking money?" Kwang set my bag down on the table, his voice dropping. "Mom, the truth isn't clear yet. Don't talk as if Deep is guilty." Tuan sneered, his voice full of sarcasm. "I understand you're on her side, but you should be clear-headed. Sister Deep always acts so principled and noble, looking down on how others work, but who knows what she's like behind our backs." I looked at Tuan. The anger that had been bubbling inside me for days was gone, replaced by a distinct coldness. When someone has already dared to sacrifice their sister-in-law for a position, making up a few more malicious lies is nothing out of the ordinary. Kwang stepped forward, grabbed Tuan by the collar, and jerked him to his feet. "Say that again if you dare." Tuan faltered for a moment but still tried to remain defiant. "Did I say something wrong? If she's truly clean, then what is she afraid of being investigated for?" Kwang gritted his teeth. "Don't think I don't know what you're up to. From the Kai incident to Deep's company affairs, if I find your fingerprints on any of it, I won't let you off." Just then, the outer door opened slightly, and Hong walked in, her face pale, clutching a stack of papers. She stood at the threshold, looking at me and then at Kwang as if wanting to speak, but her throat tightened. As soon as Tuan saw his wife, his face changed color. "Who gave you permission to come here?" Hong started, clutching the papers tighter. Mrs. Lee frowned. "Hong, if you and your husband have something to discuss, go to your room. Don't stand here making things more complicated." I noticed the stack of papers in Hong's hand. The edges were crumpled, revealing a few lines of handwriting. Tuan stepped forward instantly to snatch them, but Kwang was faster, blocking him and letting her speak. Hong looked at Tuan, trembling, tears welling up in her eyes. Tuan growled, "Watch yourself, say one wrong word and don't blame me." The threat made Hong flinch, but this time she didn't back away. She placed the papers on the table, her voice small but audible. "Tuan made me write this down. He told me that if anyone asked, I had to say Deep had proactively asked about Kai, and that if Kai had influence, it wouldn't hurt to meet him privately once." I picked up the paper. It was a pre-written statement, every word twisted to make me look like I was hitting on Kai, and Tuan like a helpful intermediary. I looked at Hong without blame, asking slowly, "Who told you to write these lines?" Hong burst into tears. "It was Tuan. He dictated it to me. He said if I didn't sign as a witness, he would divorce me, take the kids, and say I colluded with you to ruin his future." Tuan lunged forward and shouted, "Shut your mouth, I provide for you and now you're turning around to bite me?" Quote. Hong shook violently but choked out, "You never provided for me. You only used fear to keep me silent." The room fell completely silent. Mrs. Le opened her mouth to defend Tuan, but this time, she couldn't find any words that would sound right. Kwong held a fake statement, his hand trembling with rage. He looked at his brother, his voice raspy. "You forced your wife to give a fake testimony to hurt your sister-in-law. Are you even human?" Tuan bowed his head but still tried to justify himself. "I was just trying to save myself. If Deep had just been a little softer, it wouldn't have come to this." I looked at him, feeling more disgusted than angry. There are people who, when they fall into the mud, don't look for a way out but only want to drag others down so they won't feel so alone. Kwong stopped talking and turned to Mrs. Le, holding out her phone. I was startled, not knowing when he had managed to get hold of Mother's phone. The screen shows messages with Tuan, including photos of my work schedule, my company ID, and even an old medical report I used to keep in my bedroom drawer. My heart felt like it was being crushed. Kwong looked at his mother, his voice cracking. "Mom, explain why Deep's private things were on your phone and sent to Tuan." Mrs. Le turned pale and stammered, "Mom, I just sent them for him to see. He asked, so I sent them. I didn't know he would give them to an outsider." Quote. I stood frozen, a chill running down my spine. The things Kai knew about me didn't come to him by chance after all. A door had been opened from within this very house. I asked her, my voice very soft but every word dropping like a weight onto the floor. "Mom, when did you go into my room to take those documents?" Mrs. Le bowed her head and did not answer. That silence was even more painful than a confession. Kwong took a step back, looking at his mother as if she were a stranger. He said softly, "Mom, you didn't hold the knife, but you showed them the way to stab my wife." No one said another word. Hong covered her face and wept. Tuan stood stunned, for the first time lacking the voice to argue. As for me, I looked at the papers on the table and the phone in Kwong's hand, realizing that from this moment on, this was no longer just a family conflict. It had become a trap set by outsiders, with someone from inside opening the door. And if I don't save myself, no one else will be able to clear my name. That night, after everything blew up in the living room, I stopped arguing with Mrs. Le or Tuan. There are people who, having chosen to turn a blind eye to wrongdoing, will only interpret your explanations as defiance. I quietly gathered the papers Hong had brought, took photos of the messages on Mrs. Lee's phone, and saved the false statement Tuan had forced Hong to write. Kwong stood beside me, his face still pale from the shock, but his gaze was different, no longer avoiding, no longer trying to reconcile. He knew that if we kept letting everything be buried under the label of family, they would push me into a bottomless pit. Once in my room, I spread all the documents out on my desk. On one side was the evidence related to Kai, messages from unknown numbers, threatening calls, and the envelope in my drawer. On the other side was everything concerning Tuan, debt papers and photos of budget estimates that had been price adjusted, the forged versions and the messages Ms. Le sent containing my private information. Looking at that pile of paper, I felt both hurt and clear-headed. Hurt because it proved that my kindness had been viewed as a weakness. Clear-headed because from this moment on, I knew I could no longer act on emotion. Kwong sat opposite me, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. He said softly, "Should we report this to the police?" I shook my head. "It's not enough. These things prove their intentions, but if we act too quickly, Kai will deny it, Tuan will call it a fabrication, and Mom will say it was just sent by mistake. As for the envelope in my drawer, they could still use it to turn the tables on me." Kwong bowed his head, his hands clasped tightly together. I knew he was furious, but I also knew that this time, anger alone wouldn't be enough. I called Bao Gi, my former supervisor who spent years in internal auditing before leaving to consult on corporate risk control. She is sharp, direct, and particularly knowledgeable about workplace entrapment cases. As soon as she picked up, I only said one thing. "Gi, I need your help, it's not a small matter." 30 minutes later, I sent her the scanned documents via a separate, private email address. She read them very quickly and called back immediately. Her voice was lower than usual. "Deep, this is no longer just a family matter or personal harassment. There are signs of collusion to inflate prices, bribery, framing staff, and using supervisory power for coercion. Do not meet anyone alone until you have a protection plan in place. I listened to every word. My heart sank, but I also felt that I was no longer alone. The next morning, I took a half day off for health reasons and met Guy at a quiet little tea shop. She arrived on time, carrying a laptop and a black notebook. After reviewing all the hard copies of the documents, she tapped her pen lightly on the table. To beat Kai, you don't use tears. You must use his own greed and overconfidence. People like him often think women backed into a shameful corner won't dare to make a scene. I asked, then what should I do? She looked at me for a long time and said, you must make him think you're scared, but every step must have witnesses, recording devices, time, and location. As for Tuan, if he really plans to inflate the project budget, he's bound to have left records of his exchanges with Kai. The key is finding him admitting it. I remembered Hong. She once mentioned Tuan often uses an old phone for messages he doesn't want on his main device. I immediately called Hong from a different number. Her voice sounded very faint, as if she were hiding in a restroom. I didn't beat around the bush, just said, Hong, do you have anything that proves Tuan discussed the project with Kai? The other end was silent for a long time, then Hong choked out, yes, I kept one of his old phones, it has recordings on it. That afternoon, Hong made an excuse about taking her child to the doctor and met me in the parking lot behind the supermarket. She wore a hooded cap, her hands shaking so much she nearly dropped the old phone. I held her hand and whispered, you haven't done anything wrong. You are protecting yourself and your child. Hong bit her lip, tears falling onto her mask. I'm terrified, but I'm even more afraid of my child paying the price later for my silence. We opened the device right there in the car. In the recording folder, there was a file over 20 minutes long. Tuan's voice came on first, a bit scratchy but clear. Once I'm a manager, I can sign with my supplier, and we'll split the difference. Then came Kai's voice, calm and arrogant. The position is yours, but your sister-in-law needs to learn how to play ball first. I don't like putting in effort for nothing. Hearing that, goosebumps broke out all over my arms. This was exactly what we needed. One short sentence, but enough to link the manager's chair, the inflated project, and Kai's filthy intentions together. I gave the file to Ms. Guy. She listened, her eyes sharpening. Good, but we still need Kai to confirm it himself in a clearer context. This time, it's not just to protect me, but to force Hung Fat Company to launch an internal investigation. I understand your point. If we only release the recording from Hong's old phone, they could claim it was edited or misunderstood. But if Kai states his conditions in front of an authority or with proper equipment ready, he can hardly deny it. That evening, I messaged Kai, saying I needed to talk, but if we met, he had to ensure the company issue would disappear. Less than a minute later, he replied, you've finally come to your senses. Tomorrow night, private room at Mok Veen restaurant, come alone. I looked at that message, no longer feeling the fear I once had. I clearly saw that the fish had started to take the bait. Ms. Guy immediately set the plan into motion. She said people from the corporate oversight board related to the project would appear nearby as dinner guests. And Kwang would stay outside the restaurant, not entering unless necessary to avoid alerting Kai. I wouldn't carry obvious devices, just the small recording pen Ms. Guy prepared and a silent call active through an earbud hidden in my hair. Before I left, Kwang held my hand for a long time. He said, I'd rather rush in and beat him up than let you sit in front of him one more time. I looked at him and replied softly, I'm scared too, but if I don't clear this up, I'll live the rest of my life under the shadow he cast on my honor. Kwang bowed his head, his voice choking, I'll be right outside. Just say the word and I'll be there. The next evening, I walked into Mok Veen restaurant. The private room at the end of the hall already had its door open. Kai was sitting there, in a crisp white shirt, with a glass of wine and a blue folder in front of him. He looked up at me, his lips curling slightly like someone who had already won. Deep, choose tonight. Lose your honor in silence, or lose everything in front of the world. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and looked him straight in the eye. This time I didn't come to beg. I came to watch him step into the trap created by his own arrogance. I sat down across from Kai, trying to keep my back perfectly straight. In the private room, the yellow light cast down on the wooden table, making the glass of wine before him glow a disturbingly dark red. On the table also sat a blue folder, with a sheet of paper bearing my name clipped to the cover. Just a glance was enough for me to recognize it as an internal disciplinary report, intentionally prepared by someone. Kai didn't just want to see me, he wanted me to see that I had been backed right to the edge of a cliff. He pushed the folder toward me, his voice indifferent. Take a look. I've prepared 2 paths for you. 1. Sign here, admitting you took money but caused no consequences. Your company will let you resign quietly. 2. If you're sensible with me tonight, everything will disappear by tomorrow. I looked at him and asked slowly, you're a director at Hung Fat. Since when do you have the power to decide disciplinary actions at my company? Kai laughed, a smile full of complacency. Deep. How many years have you been working and you're still this naive? Those with connections have an open door everywhere. I didn't touch the folder. I just stared straight at Kai and said quietly, I came here because I wanted to hear your terms clearly. You said that if I spend one night with you, the matter at my company will be settled, and Tuan will become the department head. Is that right? Quote. Kai raised an eyebrow, seemingly amused that I was so blunt. He took a sip of wine and replied, you use such heavy words. I'm just giving you a chance to make things right. Tuan needs that seat, you need your reputation, and I need you. It's a win-win-win situation. Quote. In my ear, the silent call signal was still active. I knew Ms. Gee and the people from the supervisory board were listening to every word, but I also knew that listening alone wasn't enough. Kai had to say more himself, more clearly. I tried to swallow my nausea and continued, how much has Tuan spent on you already? Kai sneered, he did it voluntarily. A few drinking sessions, some gifts, a few nights out. Compared to a department head seat, what's that worth? You want to climb the ladder with clean hands? Are you going to climb on faith alone? Quote. I placed both hands under the table and pinched my palms to keep my voice from trembling. So what about the upcoming project? Tuan said if he becomes the department manager, he will sign with the supplier you specify. Kai looked at me for a moment, perhaps weighing how much I already knew. Then his arrogance overcame his caution. He leaned forward, speaking in a low but clear voice. Once he's the manager, all the files will pass through his hands. The supplier I bring in will inflate the quote, and we'll split the difference. Every company has its under-the-table deals. You've handled files for years, don't tell me you've never seen that. I felt a chill, but kept my face calm. So you're giving Tuan that seat not because of his talent, but because he'll do what you say. Kai laughed. Talent is for meetings, but in the real world, people who listen are the ones you can use. He paused, his eyes sweeping over my face shamelessly. But with Tuan, money is only part of it. I agreed to promote him because he has something I want more. I knew he was talking about me, a wave of disgust surged, but I forced myself to ask me. Kai didn't hide it, he nodded very slowly. Right, you humiliated me in front of so many people back then. I used to think there would come a day when you'd have to sit before me. Lowering his voice, he added, today was worth the wait. I looked at the glass in front of him, at that smug smile, and suddenly found this man pitiful in a sick way. More than 10 years have passed, he has status, money, and sycophants, but he is still gnawed by a rejection from his college days, his personality twisted by it. I said softly, you don't love anyone, you just want to win something you once lost. Kai slammed his glass onto the table, his eyes darkening. Don't act like you understand me, you don't have the right. The atmosphere in the room turned tense instantly. Kai suddenly stared fixedly at my hair clip. He squinted slightly, you're too calm today, not like someone here to beg. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept an indifferent expression. He stood up, walked around the table, and came to my side. Are you playing recording tricks again? Having said that, he snatched my bag and dumped everything out onto the table. Lipstick, wallet, tissues, keys spilled everywhere. He searched quickly but found no device. I looked up at him. What are you afraid of? If you're innocent, why does a handbag rattle you so much? That statement struck Kai's pride perfectly. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing so hard I felt a sharp pain. Deep, you still have that same tone. Back then, it was because of this mouth that I wanted to break you. I gritted my teeth, refusing to cry out. I knew that if I panicked, he would only gain more leverage. Just then, the door flew open. Kwang rushed in first, face flushed, his eyes burning with rage at Kai. Right behind him was Bao Gi and 2 men in dark shirts, wearing Hung Fap Inspection Committee badges on their chests. Kai let go of my hand as if burned. For a moment, the arrogance on his face cracked, revealing a very real sense of panic. Gi stepped inside, her voice clear. Mr. Kai, we have heard enough. The entire conversation has been recorded by the inspection committee as part of an internal misconduct verification process. Kai immediately changed his expression, forcing a smile. You've misunderstood. Deep and I are old friends. We were just talking privately and things got a bit heated. Kwang stepped in front of me, his voice low. Old friends who squeeze my wife's wrist and force her to trade her honor for my brother's position? Kai looked around, seeing the tables had turned, his face pale. Yet he still tried to stay calm. There is no evidence proving I forced anyone. Words spoken in private can be edited or taken out of context. Gi placed her phone on the table. The screen showed an active recording call with the timer running. One of the two inspection committee members opened a briefcase and took out a report. In that case, please provide a written explanation, and you would do well to be careful with every word from now on. I stood behind Kwang, my wrist still aching, but my heart felt a little lighter. For the first time since Kai reappeared in my life, he was no longer the one looking down from above. He had been dragged into the light right where he thought he held the power to decide my fate. Kai stood in the middle of the room, trying to maintain his composure, but his eyes were no longer as cold as they were at first. When someone is used to looking down on others for too long, they only need to be pulled down to size for their true face to be revealed. He adjusted his collar and gave a faint, cynical smile to Ms. Bao Gi and the two members of the audit committee. The way you people are acting is an invasion of privacy. I was just meeting an old friend and sharing a few jokes. Does that really require a formal report? Ms. Gi didn't answer right away. She placed the recording phone on the table, right next to the file that Kai had used to threaten me. Her voice remained steady, neither too high nor too low. If you were just meeting an old friend, you wouldn't need to mention department head positions, suppliers, inflated quotes, or making whistleblowing files disappear at Deep's company. Those didn't sound like jokes. A member of the audit committee opened a tablet, recording the time, location, and everyone present. Kai watched the movement, his mouth twitching slightly. He turned toward me, his gaze shifting to a look of feigned reproach. Deep, I didn't expect you to do this. After all, we used to know each other. Bringing people here to set me up like this. Do you think you're being a decent person? I looked at him, feeling calmer than I expected. I didn't set you up. I just sat here and let you speak about what you've done yourself. Decent people aren't afraid of the light. Kai. Kai immediately turned to Kwang, his voice mocking, and you must be very proud, right? Letting your wife meet another man and then standing outside to eavesdrop. Kwang took a step forward, but I placed my hand on his, and he stopped. I knew Kai was trying to provoke us, just as he had from the beginning. Kwang took a deep breath, his voice very low. I'm not proud of this situation. I'm hurt, but I'd rather be hurt by hearing the truth than let my wife be silenced by a coward. That sentence made the room go silent for a few seconds. Kai turned his face away, clearly no longer able to provoke us as easily as he thought. At that exact moment, Ms. Gi took out a copy of a recording from Hong's old phone. She played the exact part where Tuan said, once you become department head, you can sign off on my suppliers, and we'll split the difference. Right after that was Kai's voice. I'll give you the chair, but your sister-in-law needs to learn how to behave first. Kai turned pale but still tried to make excuses. Where did this file come from? Who can prove it hasn't been edited? What does Tuan's nonsense have to do with me? As soon as he finished speaking, the door to the private room was suddenly pushed open. Tuan walked in hurriedly, phone in hand, looking as cheerful as someone about to receive good news. Perhaps Kai had messaged him to come earlier, or Tuan came on his own, thinking he would secure the manager's chair tonight. As soon as Tuan walked in, he spoke right away. Brother Kai, has Sister Deep agreed yet? Can I sign the documents tomorrow? Those words fell into the middle of the room like a knife stabbing his own throat. Tuan looked up, seeing Kwang, seeing me, seeing Kai Gi and two members of the control board, his face instantly drained of all color. He stammered, Why is everyone here? Kwang looked at his younger brother, his eyes filled with both pain and anger. What did you just ask? Sign what documents? What did Sister Deep have to agree to? Tuan stepped back, turning to Kai for help, but Kai immediately wiped his hands of everything. I don't know what he's talking about. This guy must have been drinking and talking nonsense. Tuan was stunned in a heartbeat. The person he had sacrificed money, honor, and conscience to please was now ready to use him as a shield. Tuan's voice trembled. Brother Kai, what are you saying? You were the one who told me. Kai snapped. Shut up. Handle your own business. Don't drag me into it. That scene sent a chill down my spine. Bad people call each other brothers or partners as long as they can exploit one another. But when the fire reaches their feet, the first people they trample on are each other. The door opened once more. Hong walked in, leading her young child by the hand. The child huddled close to her mother's legs, eyes fearfully watching the adults in the room. Hong wore no makeup today, her face still pale, but her gaze was different. It was no longer the look of someone who only knew how to bow down and endure. She placed a stack of papers on the table. Debt notes, photos of Tuan's threatening messages, a forced false statement, and images of the budget estimates with altered prices. Tuan went ballistic when he saw Hong. "Why did you bring the child here? Who gave you the right to betray me?" Hong held her child and stepped back, but this time she didn't cry immediately. She looked straight at Tuan, her voice trembling but clear. "I'm not betraying you. I just don't want to keep lying so you can hurt others." Tuan gritted his teeth. "I am your husband," Hong replied. "Being a husband doesn't give you the right to force your wife to commit perjury. Being a husband doesn't mean you can use our child's future to threaten their mother into silence." I stepped toward Hong, gently placing my hand on her shoulder. "You've shown enough courage just by saying this much." Hong looked at me, tears falling, but this time it wasn't out of fear. She turned to the two members of the supervisory board and recounted everything. Tuan borrowed money to bribe for a promotion, forced her to hide the debt, made her memorize a false testimony, and threatened to take their child if she told the truth. Her words weren't flowery, but the very sincerity in her trembling made it impossible for the listeners to dismiss. Tuan slumped into his chair, clutching his head in his hands. He muttered, "I just wanted to change my life. I just wanted people to respect me for once." Kwong looked at his younger brother, his voice choked. "If you want respect, live in a way that deserves it." No one respects a man who sells out his wife, his sister-in-law, and his entire company just to get ahead. Seeing things spiraling out of control, Kai retreated toward the back door. But a restaurant security guard was already blocking the way, as arranged by Ms. Gi. The two supervisory board members immediately demanded he stay to face the inquiry and sealed the documents on the table. Kai growled, "You have no right to hold me here." Ms. Gi replied coldly, "We aren't holding you here by force. We are holding you here with the very words you just spoke and the documents sitting in front of you." For the first time, Kai couldn't force a smile, and I stood in the middle of that room, watching Tuan hang his head, watching Kai turn pale, and watching Hong hold her child while tears streamed down her face. I felt none of the triumph I had once imagined. I only saw one thing clearly. When greed goes too far, it doesn't just pull down the wicked, it hurts the vulnerable people around them too. And that night, at the very least, Hong managed to step out of the shadow of her own fear. The night at Mok Vien restaurant ended with a much longer report than I had expected. The internal audit team required Kai, Tuan, and Hong to sign off on what happened in the private room. Kai initially refused to sign, loudly claiming that he had been set up. But when Ms. Bao Gi placed the call logs, the audio file from Hong's old phone, and the messages he had sent me before him, he could only fall silent. That silence wasn't an admission of guilt, but the calculation of someone realizing they could no longer just talk their way out of it. Tuan, however, was completely devastated. He sat hunched in the corner of the room, his hands crushing his shirt. When he first joined, Tuan thought Kai would support him, that the department manager seat was just a nod away. Yet in less than an hour, everything he tried to hide was laid bare for outsiders to see. When the auditors asked about the budget sheet with adjusted prices, Tuan stammered that it was only a draft. When asked why there was a recording of the discussion about splitting the surplus, he turned to look at Kai for help. Kai didn't look at Tuan. He stood by the window, face cold, and said something I will always remember. "I am not responsible for the imagination of my subordinates." Tuan snapped his head up, his eyes bloodshot. "Kai, how can you say something like that? You were the one who told me to do it. You said we only needed Ms. Deep." At that point, Tuan stopped, realizing that the more he spoke, the more he exposed himself. Kai turned back, his gaze sharp as a knife. "You should think carefully before you continue slandering your superior." Watching that scene, I suddenly saw the cheapness of relationships built solely on self-interest. Yesterday they were brothers, promising promotions and discussing how to split the extra money. Today, at the first sign of danger, the one with power immediately wipes his hands clean, letting his subordinate fall first. Tuan is greedy and pathetic, but he is also reaping what he sowed by placing his trust in someone without a conscience. After leaving the restaurant, we did not go straight home. Kwong took me and Hong to a nearby kanji shop that was still open late. Hong's baby had fallen asleep on her shoulder, small cheeks pressed against her thin shirt. Hong sat opposite me, eyes swollen and red, clutching her child tightly as if fearing that if she let go, everything else in her life would vanish. I ordered a bowl of hot porridge for her. Eat something. You were very brave tonight. Hom looked at me, tears spilling out again. I wasn't brave, ma'am. I was just so scared, that's why I spoke up. I was afraid that if I kept quiet, my child would one day look at me as an accomplice. I replied gently, being scared but still telling the truth. That is what courage is. Kwang sat beside us in silence for a long time. He looked at his little nephew, then turned his face away. I knew he was hurting. No matter how bad Tuan was, he was still his brother, but some pains cannot be masked by blood ties when they stem from wrongdoing. Back home, news of Kai and Tuan being processed by the police had somehow reached Mrs. Le. She sat in the living room, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed. As soon as she saw Tuan walk in last, she rushed over to grab her youngest son's hand. Tuan, what's going on? What is this they're saying about you being under investigation? Tuan didn't answer. He just brushed her hand away and headed straight to his room. The door slammed shut, leaving Mrs. Le frozen in place. She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with both panic and reproach. Deep. Did you do this? Do you want to push your brother into a corner? That question hit me like a bucket of cold water. I had thought that after everything exposed, she would ask if I was okay, or if Kai had done anything to me. Or at least ask if Hong and the baby were alright, but her first instinct was still to protect Tuan. Kwang set his bag on the table, his voice weary but firm. Mom, Tuan pushed himself into that corner. It wasn't deep. Mrs. Le burst into tears. He is your brother. If he does wrong, teach him. Why let outsiders open an investigation? Aren't you afraid he'll lose his entire future? Kwang looked at his mother for a long time, his eyes reflecting the pain of a dutiful son forced to wake up. It's not wrong for you to love him, but loving him to the point of covering up his evil is harming him. You've harmed him enough. Mrs. Le stood stunned, then turned to me. Are you satisfied now? Since the day you came to this house, the brothers haven't loved each other like before. I took a deep breath. If it were me a few years ago, I would probably cry, explain myself, and try to prove I didn't break up this family. But right now, I just said very softly, I am not destroying this home. Mother, I just refuse to let myself be made a sacrificial lamb anymore. Hong stood at the door holding her child. She lowered her head and whispered to Mrs. Le, Mother, may I take the baby to stay with my parents for a while? Mrs. Le turned around sharply. Even you want to abandon this house right now? Hong trembled but replied, I'm not abandoning it, I just need a peaceful place for my child. He shouldn't have to hear adults fighting every night anymore. For the first time, I saw Hong say something without fear, speaking like a mother trying to protect her child. That night, Tuan called Mrs. Le from his room, crying and saying he was abandoned by Kai, betrayed by his wife, and pressured by his brother. Mrs. Le listened with tears streaming down her face, repeating over and over, let me handle it, let me handle it. A while later, she rummaged through her remaining wedding gold, saying she would borrow from relatives to get Tuan out of trouble. Kwang immediately held his mother's hand. If you keep trying to cover for him, you'll drag yourself into prison with him. Mrs. Le slumped into a chair, crying like a child. I looked at her, my heart felt no satisfaction. Even though she had said things that hurt me to the bone, I still understood that before me was a mother collapsing because of her own blindness. I said to Kwang, tomorrow, take Mom to see a lawyer, not to evade the crime, but so she understands what should be done and what must not. Kwang looked at me, his eyes reddening. Perhaps he did not expect that after everything, I would still think of a right path for his mother. Mrs. Le looked up at me, her lips trembling, but she couldn't say a word. I wasn't waiting for a thank you either. Sometimes, kindness is not about forgiving immediately, but about not pushing someone who has done wrong to do even worse. That night, in front of the altar of the late father, Mrs. Le sat for a very long time. I walked past and heard her muttering, I thought I was saving my son, but instead, I pushed him in deeper. The words were so faint they nearly dissolved into the night, but I knew at least one crack had begun to form in her stubbornness. The next morning, Hung Fat Company issued a notice suspending Kai and Tuan to facilitate an internal investigation. The news spread quickly, not only within Tuan's company but also among their external business partners. People began whispering about that manager's chair, which had brought a mountain of dirty records with it before he could even settle in. As for me, when I heard the news from Bao Gi, I didn't feel the triumph I once thought I would. I just felt as exhausted as someone who had walked through a long rainstorm, clothes still soaked but forced to keep moving forward. The supervisory board at Hung Fat worked very quickly. The files for projects about to be launched were reopened one by one. The price quotations Tuan had prepared to submit were compared against market rates. Within just a few days, they discovered many figures were abnormally inflated, with some equipment marked up by 30%, service items split into smaller parts to bypass price approval, and even newly established suppliers being added to the priority list. Guy called me, her voice more serious than usual. Deep. Just as you suspected, it wasn't just one file. There was an entire chain of preparation. Tuan was a small link, but Kai was the one who mapped it all out. I held my phone and looked out at the balcony, my heart sinking. I once thought that proving my own innocence would be enough. But the further things went, the more I understood that if this trap wasn't exposed, it would drag many more people into it. People were losing money, jobs, and their reputations, just so a group of people could split the illicit gains. Kai was initially very defiant, claiming that every conversation was misinterpreted and the recordings were invalid because he hadn't consented to them. He insisted that meeting me was just about old emotional conflicts, but his words couldn't hide the financial trails, the unusual entertainment expenses, gift invoices under other people's names, or the circular transfers through intermediary accounts. Everything is slowly being pieced together. A person can lie, but cash flow rarely tells a perfect lie. The strongest blow came from former Hung Fat employees. When they learned Kai was suspended, several people who had kept silent for years began approaching the oversight committee. A former administrative staff member testified that Kai had once pressured her to entertain guests privately, threatening to lower her year-end performance review if she refused. Another sales employee said Kai used contract deals to force her to drink excessively with partners. These stories didn't cause a stir online, but once recorded in the minutes, every word became a brick pulling down the fake wall of power Kai had built. The day Guy recounted those events, I sat for a long time without speaking. I feel for those women. Perhaps they were as afraid as I once was, thinking no one would believe them, swallowing their humiliation to keep their jobs and their livelihood. I dare not claim to have saved anyone. I just happened to be the one who pulled the first thread, causing the entire rotten curtain behind it to unravel. As for Tuan, after a few sessions, he started to confess. Not out of immediate remorse, but because Kai washed his hands of everything so quickly. Tuan said he originally just wanted to become a department head to keep up with his peers, but then, due to heavy debts, he felt pressured to find extra income. Kai painted a very convincing path. Get promoted, sign with suppliers, inflate the prices slightly and split the difference. Tuan thought his life was about to change, but in reality, he was just a pawn pushed to the front of the board. Kwang heard those testimonies from the legal counsel and didn't say a word for the rest of the afternoon. Back home that evening, he sat on the porch for a long time, and I brought him a hot cup of tea. He took it, but his hands were still shaking slightly. Quote, he went too far, deep. But hearing his confession, he was still pained. He kept thinking that if he had been stricter with him back then, perhaps he wouldn't have strayed so far. I sat down beside him and gently said, you can blame yourself for staying silent too long, but you cannot bear Tuan's sins for him. We are adults. Whoever chooses a path must walk it on their own 2 feet. A few days later, the file was sent to the authorities due to signs of bribery, document forgery, collusion to misappropriate corporate assets, and mental coercion, and Kai was summoned for questioning. At first, he hired a lawyer and tried to contact acquaintances to work things out, but his own panic only made everything worse. The night before the second meeting, Kai sent someone into his office to retrieve his computer and several external hard drives. Security discovered it, the supervisory board sealed everything, and recovered data later revealed many fake quotes, percentage split lists, and messages with Tuan. When she heard the news that Kai had been detained for investigation after attempting to destroy data, Misla was sitting in the yard picking vegetables. Tuan was also taken in for questioning on the same day. The car waiting for him stopped at the gate. Tuan hung his head, his hair disheveled, his face gaunt. Misla rushed out, calling his name through tears. Tuan, please tell them, you were just acting foolishly for a moment, that's all. Tuan turned to look at his mother, his lips trembling, but he couldn't say a word. Perhaps only then did he realize that not every mistake can be brushed off with the excuse of being foolish. Misla collapsed right there in the yard. Kwang ran to help her up, while I stood a few steps away, my heart heavy. I wasn't happy to see her in pain, but I also couldn't forget that she was the one who pushed me into a humiliating trade. There are prices to pay that aren't for outsiders to gloat over, but for those involved to finally understand that you reap what you sow. After the official session, Tuan admitted to taking my private information and giving it to Kai to win his favor. He also confessed to forcing Hong to sign a fake statement, threatening her child, and using her debts to keep her silent. Hong was called in to provide testimony. When she walked out of the room, she called me, her voice trembling but lighter than before. Deep, for the first time, I said everything without fearing him standing behind me. Hearing that, my eyes suddenly stung. Kai was different. He still tried to blame Tuan until the very end, but the transfer records, messages, and audio files betrayed him. Someone used to controlling others with power finally found themselves bound by the very traces of that power. As for Tuan, the department manager's chair he dreamed of never belonged to him. All he got was a termination notice, an investigation file, and a broken family. That night, Kwang told me he was hurt because it was his younger brother, but he could no longer let wrongdoings be excused as family love. I held his hand in the yard. Mrs. Le sat quietly under the yellow light, her hair appearing grayer overnight. I know the road ahead still holds many wounds, but at least everything has been called by its true name. Wrong is wrong, crime is crime, and no one has the right to force a woman to sacrifice her dignity to cover up someone else's greed. 3 months after that incident, my life finally started to return to its normal orbit. The company where I work issued an official conclusion, confirming I was not involved in the bribery case and affirming that the envelope of money in my desk was a deliberate setup. The HR manager who rushed to pressure me into admitting guilt was also disciplined for failing to follow verification procedures. The company even issued a formal apology to me in front of the entire department. The day I received my new employee badge, I stood for a long time in front of the company gate. It was still the same old parking lot, the same old rows of trees. Familiar colleagues were still greeting each other every morning. Everything seemed unchanged. But only I know that I have traveled a very long way. There are wounds that cannot be seen with the eyes, but it takes a long time for them to stop aching whenever they are remembered. I requested 2 more weeks of leave, not because I was still afraid, but because I wanted to give myself some quiet time. Throughout that time, Kwang was always by my side. One weekend morning, he quietly waited for me to go visit my parents. As soon as he stepped into the yard, he bowed to my parents and said in an apologetic voice, "I am sorry, I should have protected Deep sooner, leaving her to endure so much injustice before stepping up. That is my fault." My mother looked at Kwang for a long time and just let out a soft sigh, while my father placed his hand on his son-in-law's shoulder and said slowly, "Acknowledging your mistakes to make things right is what is truly precious. Every family faces storms. What matters is whether, after the storm, you still know how to cherish those who stay by your side." I turned to look at Kwang. The man had grown much thinner after the past few days. I knew he had also had to sacrifice a great deal. He lost peace in his family, lost trust in his younger brother, and felt heartbroken seeing his mother fall apart. I gently held his hand and said, "I don't need a perfect husband. I only need someone who knows how to stand on the side of what is right, no matter how difficult it may be." Kwang squeezed my hand tightly, his eyes reddened, but he said nothing. Not long after, we decided to move out on our own, not because we wanted to cut ties with my mother-in-law, but because we both understood. Distance is sometimes the best way to maintain respect. Before moving out, Kwang told Mrs. Le clearly, "I am still your son, and I will still take care of your medicine and living expenses, but my wife and I will have our own lives. From now on, no one has the right to interfere in our marriage anymore." This time Mrs. Le did not object. She just sat silently in her old chair, her hair noticeably grayer. After that incident, she became much quieter. The woman who once believed that shielding her son was always right finally had to see how that very blind protection had harmed her own child. As for Hong, after receiving legal advice, she decided to separate from Tuan and filed for full custody of their child. I referred her to a support center for women suffering from mental abuse. At first, Hong was very timid, always afraid of saying the wrong thing. But as each day passed, she gradually became stronger. She found a small office job. The salary wasn't high, but it was enough for the two of them to live steadily. One afternoon, Hong met me at our usual cafe. The child who once hid behind her mother's back now knew how to laugh and scamper around the yard. Hong looked at me and said emotionally, "Deep, I used to think my life was only meant for enduring. If you had blamed or hated me that day, I probably would have stayed silent. Thank you for not pushing me away then, but pulling me back up." I smile as I watch the child playing happily in the sun. It wasn't me helping you, you saved yourself. I only held your hand when you were too afraid to take a step. As for Tuan, after being fired and prosecuted for his misconduct, he had to pay for everything he had caused. The department manager position that Tuan sacrificed everything to chase ultimately became just a dream. What remains are debts, remorse, and a family that is no longer whole. Kai was no different. The man who thought power could buy everything ended up losing it all due to his own greed and arrogance. When the law spoke, there were no more luxurious parties, no more flattery, and no one left to shield him. One late autumn afternoon, Kwong and I returned to the old house to visit Mrs. Le. She sat alone on the porch, her figure looking much smaller than before. Seeing us, she slowly stood up. She looked at me for a long time, her eyes red, then suddenly bowed her head, her voice trembling, deep, "I'm sorry. I thought I was loving my son correctly." Quote, "Only now do I understand that I made you, Kwong, and this whole family suffer." I stood silently. Honestly, the wounds she caused could not disappear just because of an apology. Some scars need a long time before they can finally heal. Kwong stepped forward, gently helping her sit down, then said softly, "I accept your apology, but for complete forgiveness, please give me more time." Mrs. Le nodded, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. She did not try to hold on, nor did she offer any more excuses. On the way back to our new apartment, Kwong held my hand for a long time as the evening sun bathed our small balcony in gold. He whispered, "Thank you for not letting go of my hand." I rested my head on my husband's shoulder, watching the crowd in the street, feeling much more at peace. After everything I have been through, I have realized one very simple thing. Living kindly does not mean resigning yourself to being trampled on by others. Forgiveness also does not mean forgetting everything that has happened. The most important thing is to know how to keep your self-respect. Know how to protect those you love in the right way and never let evil continue to thrive. If my story can leave something behind, I just hope each of us will always remember that family is a place to love and protect one another, never a place to sacrifice someone's honor or dignity for the ambitions of others. Because in the end, every choice has its price. Sowing kindness will bring back peace. But sowing greed and betrayal will sooner or later force you to face the consequences yourself.